Get that piece of trash off my property right now, or I am calling the police. Rick Miller screamed these words so loud that the veins in his neck bulged out against his tight polo shirt. He wasn't yelling at a thief or a vandal. He was yelling at a confused, shaking old man standing next to a rusted pickup truck that was hissing steam into the brutal Texas heat. The old man wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a free repair. He was just holding up a trembling hand, asking for a cup of tap water because he looked like he was about to pass out from heat stroke. But Rick didn't care. He kicked the bumper of the old truck with his shiny boot and laughed when the old man flinched. Inside the shop, the air wrenches went silent. Everyone was watching. And that was the moment Elias Thorne, a mechanic who hadn't raised his voice in 20 years, decided he had seen enough. He put down his wrench, walked out into the sun, and handed the stranger his own lunch water. He didn't know it yet, but that single bottle of water was about to cost him his job, but it would also hand him the keys to an empire. Before we find out who that old man really was, let us know where you are watching from and subscribe for more stories. The heat radiating off the asphalt at Miller Motors was enough to melt the rubber soles of your shoes. It was a high-volume shop, the kind that advertised fast service, but usually meant fast ways to rip you off. Elias Thorne had worked there for 15 years, keeping his head down, doing the work the younger guys didn't know how to do. He was 62, with hands that looked like leather and a back that ached from the moment he woke up until the moment he slept. He was the best mechanic in the county, but to Rick Miller, the 30-year-old manager with too much hair gel and zero respect, Elias was just a dinosaur. Rick stood over the old man, looking down his nose. The stranger was wearing dirty overalls covered in white dust, like he had been rolling in flour or drywall. His boots were held together with duct tape. He looked poor, and in Rick's world, poor people were a nuisance. I said, "Beat it, Grandpa," Rick sneered, checking his gold watch. "We have paying customers trying to get in, and this heap of metal is blocking the driveway. Move it, or I'll have it towed to the scrap yard where it belongs." The old man wiped sweat from his eyes with a dirty rag. His voice was raspy, dry as the dust on his clothes. "I just need to let it cool down, son." The radiator hose popped. "If I could just get a little water for myself and the truck, I'll be out of your hair." "Water costs money," Rick laughed, looking back at the other mechanics in the bay, expecting them to laugh with him. They didn't. They looked down at their boots. Rick turned back to the old man. "We aren't a charity. If you can't pay the $90 diagnostic fee, you don't get service. Now push this junk onto the street." The old man swayed. He grabbed the side mirror of his truck to keep from falling. It was 104 degrees. He was going to drop. Elias watched from Bay 3. He felt a burning in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat. He remembered his father telling him that a man's worth isn't measured by his wallet, but by how he treats people who can do nothing for him. Elias looked at Rick, who was smirking, enjoying the power trip. Elias wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag. He walked over to his toolbox and grabbed his personal thermos, filled with ice water. He walked out of the shaded bay and into the blinding light. Rick saw him coming. "Get back to work, Elias. The Camry in Bay 3 isn't going to fix itself." Elias walked right past Rick like he didn't exist. He went straight to the old man. He unscrewed the cap of the thermos and handed it over. "Drink," Elias said, his voice low and steady. The old man looked at Elias with eyes that were surprisingly sharp and blue. He took the thermos with shaking hands and drank greedily. Water spilled down his dusty chin, cleaning streaks of grime away. He let out a long breath. "Thank you," the old man whispered. Rick marched over, his face turning purple. "I gave you a direct order, Elias. I told you to get back to work. You are wasting company time on a non-paying loiterer." Elias ignored him. He looked at the truck. "Pop the hood," Elias said to the old man. "You touch that truck, and you're fired," Rick shouted. "I mean it, Elias. I am sick of your slow pace and your attitude. You fixed this piece of junk on my property, and you can pack your box." Elias looked at the old man, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The old man whispered, "Don't lose your job for me, son. I'll be all right." Elias looked at Rick. He looked at the sneer, the arrogance, the cruelty. He thought about his rent, which was due in a week. He thought about the empty house waiting for him. Then he thought about dignity. He popped the hood. Steam billowed out, smelling sweet like maple syrup. It was a split-upper hose. An easy fix. Elias walked back to his toolbox. Rick was screaming now, yelling about insubordination, but Elias tuned him out. He grabbed a roll of silicone rescue tape and a pair of pliers. He walked back to the truck. He wrapped the hose tight, sealing the leak. He went to the shop's hose spigot and filled a jug with water, pouring it into the truck's radiator. "Try it now," Elias said. The old man turned the key. The engine roared to life. It was rough, but it wasn't leaking. The old man climbed out of the cab. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled, dirty $10 bill. "It's all I got on me," he said, trying to press it into Elias's hand. Elias pushed the hand away gently. "Keep it. Get a real hose when you get to the next town. This tape is just a patch." "You're a good man," the stranger said. He looked at Rick, then back at Elias. "You're a very good man." He got in his truck and drove away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the humid air. Rick was standing there, his arms crossed, tapping his foot. The other mechanics, Kyle, Dave, and Tony, were watching from the shadows, terrified. "You finished playing Samaritan?" Rick asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I fixed the problem," Elias said, wiping his hands. "The driveway is clear." "You're done," Rick said. He pointed a finger at Elias's chest. "You are fired. Get your tools and get off my lot. I don't want to see your face here again." Elias looked at the shop. He had worked here for 15 years. He had built this place's reputation while Rick was still in high school. But he didn't fight. He didn't beg. He just nodded. "Okay," Elias said. He walked into the bay. It took him an hour to pack. He had a lot of tools. Quality tools he had bought over a lifetime. He loaded his heavy red toolbox into the bed of his own pickup truck. The other mechanics watched him. Kyle looked like he wanted to say something, wanted to apologize, but he was scared of Rick. Elias didn't blame him. Kyle had a new baby at home. Elias drove out of the lot. He saw Rick in the office window, laughing on the phone, probably bragging to the owner about how he trimmed the fat. Elias drove home feeling a heavy stone in his stomach. He was unemployed. He was 62. Who was going to hire him now? His house was small, just 2 bedrooms with a porch that needed painting. He walked inside. It was quiet. Too quiet. His wife, Martha, had passed away 3 years ago, and the silence was still the hardest part of his day. He sat in his recliner and looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly, not from age, but from fear. "I did the right thing, Martha," he whispered to the empty room. "I had to." The next 3 days were a nightmare. Elias went to 5 different shops. He filled out applications. The managers looked at his resume, saw his experience, and smiled. But then they saw him. They saw the gray hair. They saw the slight limp in his walk. "We're looking for someone a little more familiar with modern tech," one manager said, dismissing him. "We need guys who can move fast," another said. Elias sat on his porch on the 3rd evening, drinking a cheap beer. He had $200 in his checking account. The electric bill was sitting on the counter inside, unpaid. He felt useless. He felt like the world had decided he was scrap metal, just like that old truck. He was staring at the sunset when he heard the low hum of an engine. It wasn't a truck. It was quiet, powerful, expensive. A long black limousine turned onto his dirt driveway. It looked out of place, gleaming against the dry grass and dust. The windows were tinted dark. Elias stood up, setting his beer down. He thought maybe it was the bank, or maybe some developer trying to buy his land cheap. The driver's door opened. A chauffeur in a black suit stepped out. He walked around and opened the rear door. A man stepped out. He was wearing a navy blue suit that fit perfectly. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He held a cane with a silver handle, though he didn't seem to need it. Elias squinted. The face was familiar. The deep wrinkles, the sharp nose. It was the old man, the dusty stranger from the truck. But the dust was gone. The overalls were gone. He looked like he owned the state of Texas. Elias walked down the porch steps. "You clean up nice," Elias said. The man smiled. It was the same smile from that day, grateful and sharp. "And you look like a man who is enjoying his time off," the man said. "I ain't enjoying it much," Elias admitted. "My name is Arthur Sterling," the man said, extending a hand. Elias froze. Arthur Sterling. The Arthur Sterling. The man who owned Sterling Oil. The man who owned the industrial park. The man who owned half the real estate in the county. He was a billionaire. A ghost who never gave interviews and was rarely seen in public. "You're the oil baron," Elias said, taking the hand. It was a strong grip. "I prefer businessman," Arthur said. "May I come in? It's hot out here, and I believe I owe you a drink." Elias led him into the small living room. He felt embarrassed by his worn-out furniture. But Arthur sat in the old armchair like it was a throne. I assume you know why I'm here, Arthur said. You want your $10 back? Elias asked. Arthur laughed, a loud, booming sound. I like you, Elias. You have a spine. Most people see the suit and they start shaking. Why were you dressed like a bum? Elias asked. Arthur sighed. He looked around the room, taking in the photos of Martha, the clean but simple life Elias lived. I own a lot of companies, Elias. I own the land Miller Motors sits on. I own the franchise license. But I don't run them day to day. I have people for that. But lately, I've been seeing numbers I don't like. Profits up, customer satisfaction down. Complaints. So you went undercover, Elias said. I call it a stress test, Arthur said. I take an old truck, I dress in my gardening clothes, and I see how my employees treat a nobody. Because if you treat a nobody like trash, you don't deserve to service somebody. Rick failed, Elias said. Rick failed spectacularly, Arthur agreed. But you passed. You risked your livelihood for a stranger. You showed skill, patience, and kindness. I looked into your file, Elias. 15 years. Perfect attendance. 0 comebacks on your repairs. And he fired you. He said I was wasting time, Elias said. Arthur leaned forward, resting his hands on his cane. I have a problem, Elias. I have a lot of money, but I have a passion that money can't always satisfy. I love cars. Not new cars. I hate the plastic computer chips on wheels they make today. I love the classics. The iron and steel. The engines you can feel in your chest. Elias nodded. He understood that. I have a warehouse about 10 miles from here, Arthur continued. It's full of them. Packards, Duesenbergs, Mustangs, old Shelbys. But I can't find anyone to work on them. I hire these fancy restoration shops, and they rip me off. They cut corners. They treat the cars like investments, not art. What are you asking? Elias said. I don't want to hire you, Elias, Arthur said. Elias felt his heart sink. Oh, I want to go into business with you, Arthur said. Elias blinked. Say again? I have a building downtown. It used to be a dealership in the 50s. It's been boarded up for years. I want to reopen it. I want to turn it into the premier restoration and repair shop in the state. High-end work. Honest work. No upselling. No cheating. Just pure mechanics. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He placed them on the coffee table. I put up the capital. I pay for the building, the tools, the parts. You run it. You are the boss. You hire who you want. You fire who you want. We split the profits 50-50. And you oversee the restoration of my private collection. Elias stared at the keys. He felt like the room was spinning. Me? I'm just a mechanic. I ain't never run a business. I don't have a degree. You have integrity, Arthur said fiercely. I can hire accountants to count the money. I can hire lawyers to read the contracts. I cannot hire a man who will give his own water to a stranger in the desert. That you are born with. Elias looked at Arthur. He saw the trust in the billionaire's eyes. What about Rick? Elias asked. Arthur smiled, and this time it wasn't a nice smile. It was a shark smile. Rick doesn't know who I am. He thinks I'm just some dusty old drifter he kicked off his lot. I want to keep it that way for a while. I want to see what happens when a real competitor opens up down the street. I want you to bury him, Elias. Not with dirty tricks, but with quality. I want you to steal every customer he has by being better. Elias felt a spark in his chest. A fire he thought had gone out years ago. He picked up the keys. They were heavy, cold metal. I get to pick my crew? Elias asked. Anyone you want, Arthur said. I don't want the guys with the shiny resumes, Elias said, looking at the keys. I want the ones nobody else will hire. The ones Rick would laugh at. Arthur stood up and buttoned his jacket. Then we have a deal. The shop is at 404 Main Street. It's fully stocked with lifts. I had new tools delivered this morning. Go see it. Arthur walked to the door, then turned back. And Elias? Yeah? Thank you for the water. Arthur walked out, got into his limousine, and drove away. Elias stood in his living room for a long time. Then he grabbed his hat. He went to his truck. He drove to 404 Main Street. The building was beautiful. It was old red brick with huge, curved glass windows. It had been scrubbed clean. Above the door, there was a fresh sign, covered in canvas. Elias walked in. The smell of fresh paint and new rubber hit him. There were 6 bays, brand new hydraulic lifts. And against the wall, a row of red tool chests, empty and waiting. Elias ran his hand over a workbench. He was a partner. He was an owner. He knew exactly who he needed to call first. He didn't pull out a phone book. He drove to the other side of town, to a small, rundown apartment complex where the parking lot was full of potholes. He knocked on door 3B. A woman opened it. She was about 35, wearing a waitress uniform, looking exhausted. A toddler was clinging to her leg. This was Sarah. She used to be the best diagnostic tech at Miller Motors until she got fired 3 years ago for being late twice when her babysitter quit. Rick had called her unreliable. Elias knew she was a genius with electrical systems. Elias? Sarah asked, surprised. What are you doing here? I got a job, Elias said. And I need a lead tech. Sarah laughed bitterly. Who's gonna hire me, Elias? I can't work weekends. I have the baby. I'm the boss, Elias said. You work the hours you can. You bring the kid if you have to. We'll put a playpen in the office. I need your brain, Sarah. Sarah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. You serious? Dead serious. Double what you made at Miller's. She dropped the rag she was holding. When do I start? Tomorrow, Elias said. Next, he drove to the bad part of town. He pulled up to a halfway house. There was a kid sitting on the stoop, smoking a cigarette. He was skinny, covered in tattoos, with a shaved head. His name was Tyrell, but everyone called him Ty. He had done 3 years for stealing cars. But Elias knew why Ty stole cars, because he loved taking them apart and putting them back together. Ty could weld aluminum like he was sewing silk. He could paint a car so smooth it looked like liquid. Ty looked up, squinting. Mr. Elias? You out of trouble, Ty? Elias asked, leaning out the window. Trying to be, Ty said, flicking the cigarette away. Nobody hiring ex-cons, though. They see the ink. They slam the door. I got a door that's open, Elias said. I'm opening a restoration shop. I need a body man and a fabricator. Ty stood up slowly. I ain't touched a welder in 4 years, Mr. Elias. It's like riding a bike, Elias said. You want a second chance, or you want to sit on this porch? Ty grinned, revealing a gold tooth. I'm ready. Good. Be at 404 Main at 7 a.m. Don't be late. Elias drove home as the sun set. He had a single mom and an ex-con. A team of rejects. Rick Miller would have laughed until he choked. But Elias knew something Rick didn't. He knew that people who have been thrown away work harder than anyone else when someone finally picks them up and dusts them off. The next morning, Elias unlocked the front door of the new shop. He pulled the canvas off the sign. It didn't say Sterling Auto. It said, Second Chance Restorations Owners. A. Sterling and E. Thorne. Sarah pulled up in her beat-up Honda. Ty walked up from the bus stop. They stood on the sidewalk, looking at the clean glass, the new tools, the promise of a future. We got work to do, Elias said, holding the door open. Across town, at Miller Motors, Rick was screaming at Kyle because a brake job had come back with a squeak. He didn't know that a mile away, an engine was starting up that was going to run him right off the road. The war had begun, and Elias Thorne wasn't holding a wrench anymore. He was holding a sword. Rick Miller stood in the center of his shop, listening to a sound that terrified him. It wasn't the sound of a broken engine or a grinding transmission. It was the sound of silence. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, prime time for auto repair, and 3 of his 6 bays were empty. The mechanics he hadn't fired, Kyle, Dave, and Tony, were standing around pushing brooms, trying to look busy. Rick paced back and forth in front of the service counter, his expensive loafers squeaking on the tile. He grabbed the phone and dialed the parts store. Where are my brake pads for the Honda? He barked into the receiver. I don't care if the driver is at lunch. I want them here now. He slammed the phone down. The truth was, there was no Honda. He just needed to yell at someone to feel like he was still in control. Because down the street, just 4 blocks away, there was a noise that was keeping Rick awake at night. It was the hum of machinery, the roar of test drives, and the laughter of customers. It was the sound of Elias Thorne stealing his empire. At 404 Main Street, Second Chance Restorations didn't look like a normal mechanic shop. It looked like an operating room for heavy metal. The floors were painted a glossy gray that was swept every hour. The tools were organized in red chests that lined the walls like soldiers. And the air didn't smell like stale grease. It smelled like fresh coffee and industrial soap. Elias Thorne was under the hood of a 1967 Mustang Fastback, tuning the carburetor by ear. He closed his eyes, listening to the intake breath. He twisted a screw a quarter turn. The engine settled into a deep, rhythmic growl that shook the concrete floor. She's singing now, boss, a voice said. Elias wiped his hands and looked up. Ty, the ex-con with the tattoos and the gold tooth, was standing there holding a fender he had just finished sanding. It was smooth as glass. Ty had been working for Elias for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, he hadn't stolen a dime. He hadn't been late once. He treated the metal like it was precious. Good work, Ty, Elias said. Get it in the booth. Arthur wants this one cherry red. You got it, Ty grinned. In the corner of the shop, Sarah was huddled over the open dashboard of a Jaguar E-Type. It was a wiring nightmare, a rat's nest of brittle cables. Most mechanics would have looked at it and quoted a price to replace the whole harness just to avoid the headache. Sarah was tracing each wire with a multimeter, her face inches from the fuse box. Next to her toolbox, inside a playpen set up in the safety zone of the office, her 2-year-old son was sleeping soundly, clutching a plush wrench Elias had bought him. Found it, Sarah called out, not looking up. Bad ground on the relay. I don't need a new harness, Elias. I just need 5 minutes and some heat shrink. That's why you're the lead tech, Elias said, smiling. This was the team Rick Miller had thrown away. The old man, the single mom, and the criminal. And they were currently billing more hours in a week than Miller Motors did in a month. But Elias knew it wasn't just about the work. It was about the feeling. When customers walked into Second Chance, they weren't greeted by a service writer trying to sell them a cabin air filter they didn't need. They were greeted by Elias. He showed them the broken parts. He explained the fix. He gave them the price, and the price didn't change. Word had spread fast in the small Texas town. In a place like Dusty Gears, you can't buy advertising better than gossip at the diner. And the gossip was all saying the same thing. Go see Elias. He won't cheat you. Rick Miller heard the gossip too. He heard it when he was getting his morning latte. He heard it when his suppliers dropped off parts. And it was eating him alive. It's a gimmick, Rick said to Kyle later that afternoon. They were standing in the empty lot of Miller Motors. It's a novelty act. The nursing home escapee and the jailbird. They can't keep up with modern cars. They don't have the scanners. They don't have the software. Actually, Rick, Kyle said, looking at his boots. I heard they just installed the new Snap-on diagnostic system. The wireless one. We don't even have that. Rick spun around, his face flushing red. Shut up, Kyle. If you love them so much, why don't you go work there? Kyle didn't answer. He wanted to. Every mechanic in town wanted to. But Rick made sure everyone knew that Ty was an ex-con. He spread the rumor that Elias was running a chop shop, using stolen parts to keep his prices low. You can't do good work that cheap, Rick told anyone who would listen. He's cutting corners. You watch. Someone's will is going to fall off on the highway. But the wheels didn't fall off. The cars ran better than ever. And then, the ultimate insult happened. Mrs. Gable, the town's wealthiest widow and a loyal customer of Miller Motors for 20 years, drove her pristine, white Mercedes past Rick's shop. Rick waved at her, putting on his best customer service smile. Mrs. Gable didn't wave back. She kept driving. Rick watched in horror as she put her blinker on and turned into the lot of Second Chance restorations. Rick threw his clipboard across the parking lot. It shattered against the wall. That's it, Rick hissed. He wants a war? I'll give him a war. Rick walked into his office and slammed the door. He picked up his phone. He didn't call a customer. He called a number he had saved for emergencies. It was the direct line to the city code enforcement office. He knew a guy there. A guy who owed him a favor for fixing a transmission off the books. Yeah, Jerry, it's Rick, he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. Listen, I'm calling as a concerned citizen. There's a new shop down on Main. Old brick building. I walked by there the other day, and the smell, chemical fumes. Strong ones. And I saw them dumping something in the storm drain behind the alley. Yeah, I think you guys need to pay them a surprise visit. Today. Rick hung up the phone and smiled. He leaned back in his chair. Let's see how you fix that, Elias. At Second Chance Restorations, the day was humming along perfectly until 2 p.m. A white city van pulled up to the curb. 2 men in uniforms got out. They carried clipboards and grim expressions. They didn't knock. They walked right into the open bay doors. Who's in charge here? The lead inspector barked. Elias wiped his hands and stepped forward. I am. Elias Thorne. We received a complaint, the inspector said, not looking Elias in the eye. Reports of illegal dumping of hazardous materials, improper ventilation in the paint booth, and code violations regarding the electrical wiring. That's a lie, Elias said calmly. We recycle all our oil. I have the receipts from the disposal company right here. And the wiring is brand new. We'll see about that, the inspector said. We're doing a full audit. Shut it down. Everyone out of the bays. Ty froze. He looked at Elias, panic in his eyes. Mr. Elias, if the cops come, I can't be around trouble. My parole officer will revoke me. Relax, Ty, Elias said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. Go take a break out back. I got this. Sarah grabbed her son from the playpen. She looked terrified. Elias, if they shut us down, I can't pay my rent. Nobody is shutting us down, Elias said. He turned to the inspector. Do your job, but do it honest. The inspectors tore the shop apart. They checked every drain. They measured the distance between the outlets and the sinks. They inspected the fire extinguishers. They were looking for anything. A loose wire. A missing label on a spray bottle. An oil stain on the concrete. Rick Miller drove by slowly in his truck, watching from the street. He saw the city van. He saw the mechanics standing outside. He smiled and honked his horn as he passed. Elias saw him. He knew exactly where this came from. The inspection lasted 4 hours. It was hot. The customers who had appointments were turned away. The momentum of the shop ground to a halt. Finally, the lead inspector walked up to Elias. He looked annoyed. He had checked everything. He had crawled under the lifts. He had gone through the trash. Well, Elias asked. The inspector sighed. He scribbled something on his clipboard. You have a cracked cover on one of your electrical outlets in the break room, and your fire extinguisher tag is faded. That's it. Elias asked. Technically, I could fine you. The inspector grunted. But I've never seen a shop this clean. You don't even have dust on the rafters. We take pride in our work, Elias said. The inspector ripped a pink slip off his pad. Fix the outlet cover. Get a new tag. I'll mark it as a pass. But watch yourself. Someone has it out for you. We don't usually get calls this specific unless someone is trying to bury you. I know, Elias said. The inspectors left. Elias stood in the quiet shop. They had survived, but just barely. He knew Rick wouldn't stop there. That evening, after Sarah and Ty went home, Elias stayed behind. He was sweeping the floor, lost in thought, when the back door opened. Arthur Sterling walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo, like he had just come from a gala, but he had a greasy burger bag in his hand. Dinner, Arthur said, tossing the bag to Elias. I heard you had visitors today. City inspectors, Elias said, catching the bag. Rick called them. Tried to shut us down. I know, Arthur said. He walked over to the 1967 Mustang Ty had been working on. He ran his hand over the fender. Rick is getting desperate. He's bleeding money, Elias. I saw the weekly reports from Miller Motors. He's down 40% since you opened. He's fighting dirty, Elias said. He's scaring my people. Ty almost ran. Sarah is worried about her kid. Arthur turned to look at Elias. The playful glint in his blue eyes was gone. It was replaced by something cold and hard. The look of a man who built an empire in the oil fields. Do you want me to crush him? Arthur asked. I can make one phone call. I can pull his franchise license. I can have the bank call his loans. I can turn the lights off at Miller Motors by midnight. Elias thought about it. It would be easy. It would be justice. Rick had fired him. Rick had humiliated him. Rick tried to ruin him. But then Elias shook his head. No, Elias said. Arthur raised an eyebrow. No? He tried to destroy you today. If you crush him with money, he learns nothing, Elias said. He'll just blame the system. He'll go somewhere else and treat people like trash again. I want to beat him fair. I want to beat him with wrenches. I want him to look across the street and see that he lost because he was wrong, not because he was unlucky. Arthur smiled. You're a stubborn man, Elias Thorne. I'm a mechanic, Elias said. I like to fix things, not just scrap them. Fine, Arthur said. We do it your way. But I'm going to level the playing field. Rick is squeezing his suppliers. He's telling the parts guys not to sell to us. He told Napa and O'Reilly's that if they delivered a second chance, Miller Motors will drop their contracts. That's why the delivery truck didn't come this morning, Elias realized. I had to send Ty to get parts in his own car. Exactly, Arthur said. So, I bought the parts store. Elias choked on his burger. You what? I bought the regional distributor, Arthur said casually, checking his cufflinks. Signed the paperwork an hour ago. Starting tomorrow, Second Chance gets priority delivery. And Miller Motors? Well, let's just say their paperwork might get lost in the shuffle. Elias laughed. He couldn't help it. You're dangerous, Arthur. I protect my investments, Arthur said. And you, my friend, are my best investment. The next week, the war escalated. Rick was furious that the inspection didn't work. He was furious that his parts were showing up late. He started standing in his parking lot, yelling at customers who tried to leave. If you go there, you void your warranty. Rick screamed at a woman in a Toyota. They aren't certified. They'll break your car. The woman drove to Elias anyway. Elias greeted her. He didn't badmouth Rick. He just fixed her brakes, washed her car, and gave her a bottle of cold water. She left a 5-star review online. Rick read the review. He snapped. He decided to confront Elias face-to-face. He marched down the street, storming into Second Chance Restorations in the middle of the day. He kicked the door open. Where is he? Rick shouted. The shop went quiet. Ty put down his sander. Sarah stood up from the fender of a truck. Elias walked out of his office, wiping his hands. Can I help you, Rick? Elias asked calmly. You're stealing my customers, Rick spat, walking into the center of the shop. He looked around, sneering at the clean floors, the organized tools. You think you're special? You think this lasts? You're a fraud, Elias. You're losing money. You have to be. Nobody can run a shop this clean without charging double what I do. We ain't losing money. Ty spoke up, stepping forward. He crossed his tattooed arms. We're making money. 'Cause we fix it right the first time. Rick looked at Ty with disgust. Shut up, convict. I'm surprised you haven't stripped the copper wiring out of the walls yet. Ty clenched his fists, but Elias stepped in front of him. You're done here, Rick, Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Get off my property. Your property? Rick laughed. You rent this dump. You probably begged some bank for a loan you can't pay back. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy this building. I'm going to buy the lease out from under you. And then I'm going to evict you and your little circus of freaks. Elias just stared at him. He knew who owned the building. He knew Arthur Sterling was sitting in the corner of the office right now, listening to every word. You really don't get it, do you? Elias asked. You think business is about owning things. It ain't. It's about earning things. I earn plenty. Rick yelled. I'm the manager of the biggest shop in the county. You're the manager of a sinking ship, Sarah said, stepping up beside Elias. And everyone knows it, but you. Rick looked at the three of them. The old man, the single mom, the ex-con. They stood together like a wall. They weren't afraid of him anymore. Watch your back, Elias, Rick threatened, backing toward the door. Accidents happen. Shops catch fire. Tools go missing. You want to play with the big boys? You better be ready to get hurt. He slammed the door as he left. Elias turned to his team. They looked worried. Is he serious? Sarah asked. Will he burn us out? He's scared, Elias said. He's flailing. But we need to be careful. Ty, I want you to install cameras tonight. Arthur will pay for them. On it, Ty said. In the office, Arthur Sterling sat in the shadows. He had heard the threat. He pulled out his phone. Get me the legal team, Arthur whispered. And get me the file on Rick Miller's financials. I want a forensic audit of Miller Motors. Deep dive. Look for the embezzlement. I know it's there. I just need the proof. Arthur hung up. He watched Elias through the glass window, comforting his team. You want a war, Rick? Arthur whispered to himself. You just declared it on the wrong man. The next morning, the trap was set. But it wasn't Elias who set it. It was Rick. When Elias arrived at the shop at 6 a.m., the police were waiting. A squad car was parked in front of the bay doors. An officer was writing something in a notebook. The glass front door of the shop was shattered. Officer, Elias asked, running up. What happened? Break in, the officer said. Looks like they smashed the door. And we found this in the alley. The officer pointed. Lying in the dumpster behind the shop was a pile of catalytic converters. Expensive car parts that were often stolen to be sold for scrap. We got an anonymous tip, the officer said, eyeing Elias suspiciously. Caller said you guys were running a chop shop, buying stolen parts and fencing them. Finding these in your dumpster doesn't look good, Mr. Thorne. Elias looked at the parts. They were rusty. They were junk. Rick had planted them. I didn't put those there, Elias said. We don't buy stolen parts. That's what they all say, the officer said. I'm going to need to see your inventory records. And I need to talk to your employee, Tyrell Jackson. I see he has a record for auto theft. Elias felt the walls closing in. Rick had gone for the jugular. He had framed Ty. If Ty got arrested, his parole was over. He would go back to prison for something he didn't do. Ty didn't do this, Elias said firmly. We'll see, the officer said. Don't leave town. The officer drove away. Elias stood in the broken glass. He looked across the street. Rick Miller was standing in his lot, drinking coffee, watching. He raised his cup in a mock toast. Elias felt a rage he hadn't felt in years. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to march across the street and wipe that smile off Rick's face. But then his phone rang. It was Arthur. "Don't do it, Elias," Arthur said. "I see you. I see Rick. Don't go over there." "He framed Ty," Elias said, his voice shaking. "He smashed my shop." "I know," Arthur said. "And he made a fatal mistake." "What?" "He forgot about the cameras Ty installed last night," Arthur said. "I just watched the footage remotely. It shows Rick Miller himself, at 3 a.m., smashing your door and dumping those parts. His face is clear as day. He's holding a crowbar." Elias let out a breath. The tension left his body. "You got him." "We got him," Arthur said. "But we aren't giving the tape to the police yet." "Why not?" "Because," Arthur said, his voice turning icy, "I want to look him in the eye when he falls. Tonight, Elias. Tonight we end this." I set up a meeting. I told Rick that a wealthy investor wants to buy Miller Motors and merge it with your shop. I told him the investor is coming to finalize the deal. He thinks he's getting a payout, Elias realized. "Exactly," Arthur said. "He thinks he won. Bring your best suit, Elias. We're going to have a little party." Elias looked across the street at Rick, who was still smiling, thinking he was the smartest man in Texas. "Enjoy your coffee, Rick," Elias whispered. "It's the last good morning you're going to have. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The officer's voice was flat, routine, like he was reading a menu he had read 1,000 times before. But the words hit Elias Thorne like a hammer to the chest. He stood in the broken glass of his own front door, watching as the officer twisted Tyrell's arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 was louder than any impact wrench. Ty didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just dropped his head, staring at the oil-stained concrete. He looked exactly like what Rick Miller wanted the world to see. A criminal, a thug, a mistake. But Elias knew better. He saw a young man who had stayed late to fix a single mother's radiator for free. He saw a man who polished fenders until his fingers bled. Rick Miller was watching from across the street, leaning against the doorframe of his office, sipping coffee with a smile that could curdle milk. And in that moment, Elias realized this wasn't just a business rivalry anymore. It was a war for a man's soul. Before we see how Elias flips the table on the man who tried to destroy him, let us know where you are watching from and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun was usually a welcome sight in dusty gears, but today it felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. The police cruiser's lights flashed against the brick walls of Second Chance Restorations. Ty was shoved into the back seat. He looked through the window at Elias, his eyes dead and hopeless. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." "Don't you say that," Elias shouted, stepping toward the car. "You keep your head up, Ty. I'm making a call. You hear me? I'm making a call." The officer blocked Elias. "Step back, Mr. Thorne, unless you want to join him for obstruction." "He didn't do it," Elias said, his voice shaking with rage. "You're arresting the wrong man. The guy who did this is standing across the street laughing at you." "We go where the evidence points," the officer said dismissively. "And right now, it points to the ex-con with a record for theft, standing next to a dumpster full of stolen converters. You can argue it with the judge." The cruiser pulled away, kicking up dust. Elias watched it go, feeling a helplessness he hadn't felt since Martha died. He turned and looked across the street. Rick Miller raised his coffee cup in a mock toast, then turned and walked back into his air-conditioned office. Sarah ran up to Elias, holding her toddler on her hip. She was crying. "Elias, they took him. They took Ty. If he violates parole, he goes back for 5 years. He didn't do it, Elias." "I know he didn't." "I know," Elias said. His voice was hard as iron. "And he ain't going back. Get inside, Sarah. Lock the door. We aren't opening today." Elias walked into his office. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat at his desk and pulled out his phone. His hand was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a man ready to fight. He dialed Arthur Sterling. "They took him," Elias said the moment the line connected. "I know." Arthur's voice came back, calm and cold. "I have the police scanner in my office. Is Ty in custody? They just drove off. Arthur, we have the tape." We have Rick on video smashing the door. Why didn't you let me show it to the cop? We could have stopped this. Because, Arthur said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. If we show the tape now, Rick gets arrested for vandalism. Maybe filing a false report. He gets a slap on the wrist, pays a fine, and he's back in business next week. He'll keep coming after you. He'll find another way. So we let Ty sit in a cell? Elias shouted. He's a kid, Arthur. He's scared. Ty is safer in a cell for 3 hours than he is on the street right now, Arthur said. Listen to me, Elias. My personal attorney is already at the police station. He was waiting there before the squad car even arrived. Ty won't spend the night. He won't even be charged. We are going to show the police the tape in private. We are going to clear Ty's name. Then why the wait? Because we need Rick to feel safe, Arthur said. We need him to think he won. When a man thinks he's won, he gets careless. He stops looking over his shoulder. And that is when you cut his throat. Elias took a deep breath. He hated the game. He hated the manipulation. But he trusted Arthur. What do I do? You close the shop today, Arthur said. Make it look like you're defeated. Make it look like the end. And then, go home and put on your Sunday best. I'm sending a car for you at 5 p.m. We have a meeting. With who? With Rick Miller, Arthur said. It's time to close the deal. Elias hung up. He walked out to the main floor. Sarah was sitting on a tire, wiping her eyes. Pack up, Sarah, Elias said gently. We're closed for the day. Are we done? Sarah asked, looking around at the beautiful shop they had built. Did he win? Elias looked at the empty bay where Ty should have been sanding a fender. He looked at the broken glass on the floor. No, Elias said. He just dug his own grave. He just doesn't know it yet. Across the street, Rick Miller was having the best day of his life. He sat in his office chair, spinning back and forth, listening to the local radio station. He had already called 3 of his buddies to brag. Yeah, they hauled him off in cuffs. Rick laughed into the phone. I told you. Just a matter of time. You hire junk, you get junk. Elias is finished. The city will pull his business license by tomorrow. I give it a week before that building is boarded up again. Kyle walked into the office, holding a work order. Rick, Mrs. Gable called. She wants to know if her Mercedes is ready. Tell her to wait, Rick said, waving his hand. I'm busy. She said she saw the police across the street. Kyle said nervously. She sounded upset. She likes Elias. She won't like him when she hears he's running a fencing operation, Rick said. Don't worry about it, Kyle. By next week, we'll be the only game in town again. We can charge whatever we want. Now get out of here. I have a meeting with a VIP. Rick checked his reflection in the dark monitor of his computer. He adjusted his tie. He had received a call an hour ago from a woman named Ms. Vane. She claimed to represent a massive private equity firm from Houston. She said they were looking to acquire dominant automotive assets in the area. She wanted to meet Rick to discuss a buyout. A merger. Millions of dollars. Rick knew why they were calling. They saw that he had crushed the competition. They saw a winner. He opened his drawer and pulled out a bottle of expensive scotch he kept for special occasions. He poured himself a glass. Here's to you, Elias. Rick toasted to the empty room. Thanks for playing. At 5 p.m., the black limousine pulled up to Elias's small bungalow. Elias stepped out. He was wearing the only suit he owned, a charcoal gray one he had bought for Martha's funeral. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but he had polished his boots until they shone. The driver opened the door. Arthur was inside, wearing a tuxedo. You look like you're going to a wedding, Elias grunted as he got in. A funeral, actually, Arthur smiled. Rick's career. As the car glided toward the city, Arthur opened a leather folder on the seat between them. Before we go in, Arthur said, his face turning serious, you need to see this. I had my forensic accountants go through Miller Motors' books last night. I hacked their server. You hacked them. I own the building, Elias. I have a key to the back door. My guys went in and cloned the hard drive while Rick was busy planting parts in your dumpster. Arthur handed Elias a stack of papers. They were spreadsheets, covered in red ink. I knew Rick was greedy, Arthur said. I didn't know he was criminal. Look at line 402. Elias looked. Pension fund contributions? He's been skimming from his own mechanics, Arthur said. Kyle, Dave, Tony. Every paycheck, he deducts money for their retirement plan. But the money never goes to the bank. It goes to a shell account in Rick's name. He's stolen over $50,000 from his own employees. Elias felt the blood rush to his face. Kyle has a baby. He thinks he's saving for the future. It gets worse, Arthur said, turning the page. Look at the parts orders. He charges customers for OEM parts, original equipment from the manufacturer. But he buys cheap knockoffs from China. He's putting substandard brake pads on school buses, Elias. He's putting remanufactured alternators in ambulances and billing the city for new ones. Elias dropped the papers. This wasn't just business. This was safety. This was people's lives. He could kill someone, Elias whispered. He probably already has, Arthur said. We found 3 lawsuits that were settled out of court quietly. Brake failures. Steering failures. Rick paid them off with the money he stole. Elias clenched his fists. The anger he felt before was a campfire. This was a forest fire. I want to kill him, Elias said. We will, Arthur said. But we'll do it with paper. We're going to walk into that room, and we are going to strip him of everything he has. His job, his reputation, his freedom. And then, we are going to give it all to the people he hurt. The car slowed down. They weren't at a restaurant. They were at the Sterling Tower, the tallest building in the county. It was Arthur's headquarters. Why are we here? Elias asked. Ms. Vane told Rick the meeting is in the penthouse conference room, Arthur said. He thinks he's meeting a board of investors. He doesn't know the chairman of the board is the old man he kicked off his lot. They took the private elevator up. It opened into a room that was all glass and mahogany. The view of the Texas sunset was breathtaking. Rick Miller was already there. He was sitting at the long conference table, looking small in the giant leather chair. He had a glass of water in front of him. He looked nervous but excited. He was checking his watch. When the elevator doors opened, Rick stood up, smoothing his jacket. He put on his best smile. Gentlemen, Rick started, expecting to see bankers. Then he saw Elias. Rick's smile froze. It twitched. Elias? What are you doing here? Did you come to beg for a job? The janitor position is filled. Then he saw Arthur. Rick squinted. He recognized the face, but he couldn't place it. The last time he saw Arthur, the man was covered in dust, looking like a beggar. Now, Arthur looked like a king. I don't understand, Rick stammered. I'm here to meet the investors. Ms. Vane said. Ms. Vane works for me, Arthur said, his voice booming across the room. He walked to the head of the table and sat down. He didn't offer Rick a seat. And you are? Rick asked, his voice trembling slightly. I'm the man whose truck you kicked, Arthur said. Rick went pale. The memory came rushing back. The heat. The old truck. The beggar. You. Rick pointed a shaking finger. You're the bum. The one Elias gave water to. I am Arthur Sterling, Arthur said. I own the building you work in. I own the franchise you manage. And as of 5 minutes ago, I own the debt on your pickup truck and your boat. Rick sank back into his chair. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. Sterling? But you were dirty. I was testing you, Arthur said. And you failed. Rick looked at Elias. He looked at the old mechanic standing tall in his cheap suit. Is this a joke? Rick laughed nervously. You brought Elias here to what? To gloat? Look, Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry about the truck. I was having a bad day. But look at the numbers. Miller Motors is profitable. I'm making you money. You're stealing my money, Arthur corrected. He threw the file of spreadsheets onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. Rick stared at the folder. He didn't open it. He knew what was inside. I can explain, Rick said, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Those are just accounting errors. My bookkeeper is incompetent. I can fix it. We checked the bank records. Rick, Elias spoke up for the first time. His voice was calm, but it filled the room. We know about the pension fund. We know about Kyle's money. Rick's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit. You can't prove that. It's my word against yours. Actually, Arthur said, pressing a button on the table. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It's your actions against you. The video played. It was the security footage from last night. Black and white, crisp and clear. It showed Rick Miller, holding a crowbar, smashing the glass door of Second Chance Restorations. It showed him dragging the heavy bag of stolen converters from his trunk and dumping them in the bin. Rick watched himself on the screen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The police have seen this, Arthur said. Tyrell Jackson was released an hour ago. All charges dropped. But the police are very interested in speaking with you, Rick. They're downstairs in the lobby right now. Rick stood up, knocking his chair over. You set me up? This is entrapment. This is business, Arthur said coldly. You thought you could crush the little guy? You thought you could treat people like garbage because you had a title. But you forgot one thing, Rick. The little guys hold the world together. Men like Elias. Men like Ty. They build things. You just break them. Rick looked at Elias. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only fear. Elias, Rick begged. Please. Talk to him. We worked together for 15 years. I gave you a job. Don't let me go to jail. I have a mortgage. I have a reputation. Elias looked at the man who had fired him for giving water to a thirsty stranger. He looked at the man who had framed a kid trying to turn his life around. You didn't give me a job, Rick, Elias said. I earn my job every day. And now, you've earned this. Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out a single, cheap plastic water bottle. He placed it on the table in front of Rick. For the road, Elias said. It gets hot in jail. Rick stared at the water bottle. The elevator doors opened. 2 police officers stepped out. Rick Miller, the officer asked. Rick slumped. He let them cuff him. As they dragged him out, he looked back one last time at the old mechanic and the billionaire. The doors closed. The room was quiet. Arthur poured 2 glasses of scotch. He handed one to Elias. To the merger, Arthur said. Merger? Elias asked. I'm dissolving Miller Motors, Arthur said. I'm giving the lease to you. You're going to take over the building. You're going to take over the staff. Kyle, Dave, Tony. You're going to give them their pensions back. I'll cover the cost. And you're going to run both shops. Sterling and Thorne is expanding. Elias walked to the window. He looked down at the city lights. He saw the police car pulling away with Rick in the back. He thought about Ty, who was probably hugging Sarah right now. He thought about Kyle, who would get his savings back. He took a sip of the scotch. It burned, but it was a good burn. We got a lot of work to do, Elias said. That we do, partner, Arthur said. That we do. Elias looked at his reflection in the glass. He didn't see an old man anymore. He saw a mechanic who had just fixed the biggest problem in town. The hardest walk a man can make is walking back into the place that threw him out like trash. It had been 3 weeks since Rick Miller fired Elias Thorne for giving water to a stranger. Now, Elias stood on the sidewalk in front of Miller Motors, holding a ring of keys that felt heavier than a sledgehammer. The sun was beating down on the asphalt, baking the oil stains that Rick had never bothered to clean up. The sign above the door was cracked. The windows were dirty. But to Elias, it didn't look like a dump. It looked like a patient that needed saving. He wasn't walking in as the old guy who did the oil changes anymore. He was walking in as the owner. But he knew that owning a building and owning the respect of the men inside were 2 very different things. Before we see how Elias turns a house of greed into a home of second chances, let us know where you are watching from and subscribe for more stories. Elias unlocked the glass door of Miller Motors. The bell chimed, a hollow, tinny sound. Inside, the shop was quiet. Kyle, Dave, and Tony were sitting in the break room. They looked like prisoners waiting for the executioner. They had heard the news. They knew Rick had been arrested. They knew Sterling Oil had seized the franchise. And they knew who the new boss was. When Elias walked into the break room, nobody stood up. Kyle looked at his boots. Dave was shredding a styrofoam cup into tiny white snowflakes on the table. Morning, boys, Elias said, his voice low and rumbly. Kyle looked up, his face pale. Morning, Elias. Or, Mr. Thorne, I guess. Elias is fine, he said. He walked over to the coffee pot. It was empty and burned at the bottom. Rick never bought good coffee. Elias made a mental note to change that first. So, Dave said, his voice shaking. When do we pack? Elias turned around. Pack. We know how this works, Dave said bitterly. You won. Rick lost. We stayed with Rick. We didn't walk out with you. So now you're going to clean house. Bring in your own crew. Ty and Sarah. Elias looked at the 3 young men. They were scared. They had families. They had mortgages. They had stayed with Rick not because they liked him, but because they were afraid of him. Elias knew what fear did to a man. It made him small. I ain't Rick, Elias said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 3 envelopes. He tossed them onto the table. What's this? Kyle asked. Severance. Open it, Elias said. Kyle tore open the envelope. His eyes went wide. He pulled out a check. $5,200? Kyle gasped. What is this? That's your pension, Elias said. That's the money Rick stole from your checks for the last 3 years. Arthur Sterling's accountants found it. We got it back. Dave and Tony opened theirs. They stared at the checks in disbelief. You got our money back? Dave asked. But we didn't help you. We watched him fire you, and we said nothing. You were trying to survive, Elias said. I don't punish a man for trying to feed his family. But things are different now. Rick is gone. His way of doing business is gone. Elias leaned against the counter. I ain't firing you, Elias said. But I am changing the rules. No more upselling. No more fake parts. No more rushing through a job. If a brake job takes 2 hours, you take 2 hours. If you make a mistake, you own it. You fix it. You don't hide it. Kyle stood up. He looked at Elias, then at the check. Tears welled up in his eyes. I thought I lost this money forever. I thought. Rick said you were crazy. Rick was a liar, Elias said. Now, put those checks in the bank. Then get your tools. We have a lot of work to do. We're merging the shops. Ty and Sarah are coming over at noon. We're going to tear down that wall between the bays and make this one big shop. Yes, sir, Kyle said. He stood up straighter than he had in years. Yes, sir, Elias. At noon, the convoy arrived. It wasn't a military convoy, but it looked like one. Ty drove the shop truck from Second Chance Restorations. Sarah followed in her Honda. Arthur Sterling's limousine brought up the rear. Ty jumped out of the truck. He was wearing a fresh uniform. It was gray, crisp, and clean. On the back, embroidered in red thread, it said, Sterling and Thorne. Ty walked up to the front of Miller Motors. He looked at the shattered door where Rick had framed him. He touched the glass. You okay, Ty? Elias asked, walking out to meet him. I spent 3 hours in a cell because of this place, Ty said quietly. I thought my life was over. It's a new day, Elias said. Grab a scraper, Ty. We're taking the name off the window. Ty grinned, his gold tooth flashing in the sun. He grabbed a razor scraper. He walked up to the glass. With one long, satisfying stroke, he peeled the M of Miller Motors off the window. Sarah walked in carrying her son. She looked at the office, Rick's old office. It was a shrine to his ego. Leather chair, mirrors, motivational posters that said things like, always be closing. This office smells like cheap cologne and lies, Sarah said, wrinkling her nose. Got it, Elias said. Everything goes. I want a playpen in the corner. I want a coffee station for the customers. And take that door off the hinges. I don't want a door. An open door means an open business. For the next week, the shop was a hive of activity. They didn't fix many cars that week. They fixed the building. They pressure washed the floors until the oil stains were gone. They painted the walls a bright, clean white. They installed the new lifts Arthur had paid for. Arthur Sterling came by every day. He didn't wear a suit. He wore jeans and a work shirt. He grabbed a paintbrush. He helped Ty install the new signage. The people of Dusty Gears watched in amazement. They saw the Billionaire oil baron on a ladder, hanging a sign that read, Sterling and Thorne Automotive Honest Work. Fair prices. Rick Miller sat in a county jail cell 10 miles away. He had been denied bail because he was considered a flight risk. His lawyer had told him the evidence was overwhelming. The video of the break-in, the forensic accounting of the theft, the testimony of his own employees. Rick had lost everything. His boat, his truck, his house, all seized to pay back the debts he owed. He sat on his cot, staring at the wall, wondering how an old man with a water bottle had taken down his empire. Back at the shop, the real work began. The merger wasn't easy. Kyle and the old crew were used to shortcuts. They were used to using impact wrenches to tighten lug nuts instead of torque wrenches. They were used to ignoring small leaks. On the first Tuesday of the new shop, Elias walked by Bay 4. Dave was finishing a brake job on a minivan. Done? Elias asked. Yep, Dave said. Slap the pads on. She's good to go. Elias looked at the rotors. They were glazed. Shiny. You didn't turn the rotors? They looked okay, Dave shrugged. Rick always said just pad slap it unless the customer pays for the rotors. Elias didn't yell. He just handed Dave a micrometer. Measure them. Dave measured. They were warped by 0.003 of an inch. If you send that car out, Elias said softly, that mom is going to feel a vibration when she stops at a light. She's going to think we did a bad job. She's going to be scared. Do you want that on your conscience? Dave looked at the ground. No, Elias. Do it again, Elias said. Turn the rotors. Do it right. I don't care if it takes an extra hour. I'm paying you for the hour. Dave took the brakes apart. He turned the rotors. He greased the slide pins. When the car left, it stopped smooth as silk. That night, Dave came up to Elias. Thanks, boss, he said. I forgot what it felt like to be proud of a job. Pride is the only tool that doesn't rust, Elias said. 6 months passed. The Texas heat finally broke, giving way to a cool, crisp autumn. Sterling and Thorne Automotive was the busiest shop in 3 counties. People drove from Dallas just to have Elias look at their cars. They trusted him. The revenue was double what Miller Motors had ever made. And they didn't do it by upselling. They did it by volume. They did it because customers came back. They did it because when Elias said, "You don't need a new alternator, just a belt," people believed him. Arthur Sterling walked into the shop one afternoon in October. He was holding a small box. "Meeting in the office," Arthur announced. Elias wiped his hands and gathered the crew. Ty, Sarah, Kyle, Dave, Tony. They all crowded into the open-door office. "I have the quarterly numbers," Arthur said. He looked serious. The room got quiet. Kyle looked nervous, old habits dying hard. Arthur broke into a wide grin. "We are up 200%. The room erupted in cheers. Ty high-fived Kyle. Sarah hugged Elias. "And," Arthur said, raising a hand, "I have a surprise." He opened the box. Inside were keys. Not car keys. House keys. "Ty," Arthur said, "you've been living in that halfway house for too long. I bought a duplex down on 3rd Street. It needs some work, but the bones are good. It's yours. Rent to own. 0 interest." Ty stared at the keys. His hands, usually so steady with a welding torch, were shaking. "Mr. Arthur, I can't. I have a record." "You have a job," Arthur said. "And you have a home." Ty took the keys. He tried to speak, but he couldn't. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah," Arthur continued, "I set up a trust fund for your boy. College is paid for. He can go wherever he wants. Maybe he'll be an engineer. Maybe he'll be a mechanic. But he won't have to worry about the bill." Sarah covered her mouth, sobbing. "And Elias." Arthur turned to his partner. "I don't need anything, Arthur," Elias said. "I got my shop. I got my truck. I'm good." "I know you are," Arthur said. "But I have something for you anyway." Arthur led everyone out to the back lot. There, sitting under a tarp, was a shape Elias recognized. Arthur pulled the tarp off. It was the truck. The rusted, beat-up Ford pickup that had broken down on that hot Saturday 6 months ago. The truck that started it all. But it wasn't rusted anymore. It had been fully restored. The paint was a deep, midnight blue. The chrome sparkled. The engine, a brand new crate motor, gleamed under the hood. "I can't drive this," Elias said, running his hand over the fender. "It's too nice." "It's not for you to drive," Arthur said. "It's the company truck. It's the symbol. I want you to park it out front every day. I want people to see it and remember." "Remember what?" Elias asked. "Remember that you never know who you're talking to," Arthur said. "And that kindness is always a good investment." Elias looked at the truck. He looked at his team. A group of misfits and cast-offs who had become a family. "All right," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "Get back to work. These cars ain't gonna fix themselves." The crew laughed and scattered. A few weeks later, a young man walked into the shop. He was skinny, wearing clothes that were too big for him. He looked like he hadn't eaten in a day. He was holding a skateboard. He walked up to Elias, who was working the counter. "Can I help you, son?" Elias asked. I was wondering if you're hiring," the kid stammered. "I don't know much about cars. But I can sweep. I can learn. Nobody else will hire me 'cause I dropped out of school." Elias looked at the kid. He saw the dirt under his fingernails. He saw the fear in his eyes. He saw Ty 10 years ago. He saw himself 40 years ago. Rick Miller would have chased this kid off the lot. Rick Miller would have called the cops. Elias looked at the clock. It was lunchtime. "You hungry?" Elias asked. "A little," the kid admitted. Elias reached under the counter. He pulled out his lunchbox. He took out a sandwich and a bottle of water. "Sit down," Elias said, pointing to the stool. "Eat first. Then we'll see if you know how to hold a broom." The kid sat down. He took the sandwich like it was gold. "Thank you," the kid whispered. "My name is Leo." "I'm Elias," the old mechanic said. "Welcome to Sterling and Thorne." Arthur Sterling was watching from the door of the office. He smiled. He put on his hat and walked out to his Lincoln. His work here was done. The shop was in good hands. The legacy wasn't the oil. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the cars. The legacy was the water. The simple, cool water given freely in a desert of greed. Elias watched the kid eat. He thought about Martha. She would have liked this place. She would have liked what he built. He picked up his wrench. The shop was noisy. Impact guns rattled. Music played. Men laughed. It was the best sound in the world. All right, Leo, Elias said when the kid was done. Let's go look at an engine. I'm going to teach you how to listen to it. Listen to it. Leo asked. It talks. If you treat it with respect, Elias said, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. It'll tell you everything you need to know. Just like people. They walked into the bay together, the old master and the new apprentice, ready to fix whatever was broken. The end. Author's note to the listener. Thank you for listening to The Mechanic and the Oil Baron. This story reminds us that true worth isn't found in a bank account, but in the content of our character. When we lift others up, we rise with them. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Question of the day. Have you ever helped a stranger without expecting anything in return? Tell me your story in the comments below. See you in the next video.